Good morning and welcome to today's webinar about the Leave No Trace Youth Program Accreditation. My name is Severia and I'm the Communications Manager for Transforming Youth Outdoors, also known as TYO. TYO was created to scale the impact of outdoor youth development and transform the lives of youth and others by providing best practices, tools, and support to individuals and organizations working with youth. We are a technology platform that enables those in the field of outdoor youth programming to learn, share, network, and build upon successes. Membership to TYO is free, and you can sign up at mytyo.org. Our webinar series is just one of the many ways that TYO connects you to experts and valuable learning opportunities. It is my pleasure today to welcome back Andrew Leary, the National Youth Programs Manager at Leave No Trace. Andrew heads the Curriculum Development, Outcomes Evaluation, and Programming Collaboration with the Center's youth-serving partners. So he is very close to the Youth Program Accreditation that we're going to be talking about. And Andrew has an MS in Youth Development through Adventure and Outdoor Programming from the University of Utah. And Andrew, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Severia. Nice to meet you all digitally and welcome you to today's webinar. As noted in the title, this session is going to unpack the Leave No Trace Youth Program Accreditation, giving you details about the motivation for the program, as well as a focus on the 11 accreditation standards. We'll also explore how this resource can directly benefit your specific youth program. And as always, at the end, we'll have time to answer your questions. So again, just the overview of why now with the accreditation, a bit of the nuts and bolts, the 11 standards, and then the benefits it'll bring to your program. So why a Leave No Trace Youth Program Accreditation? I'm going to explain that question in two parts. And the first is the need for this resource in the outdoor youth programs world. This quote is something that I get a lot when I talk to youth educators. Isn't Leave No Trace just about those 7 principles? While Leave No Trace is famously known for our 7 principles related to outdoor ethics, those are simply guidelines to help remember how to make the right decisions, responsible decisions when they're recreating or spending time in the outdoors. But memorizing the 7 principles and knowing the bullet points by heart is only the tip of knowing really what it means to leave no trace. And so the Youth Program Accreditation is a tool that's going to help youth programs unpack that much more for their youth participants. Camps, schools, and other youth development programs that take young people into the outdoors have a fantastic opportunity to engage youth in discussions and activities and programs that help to protect the natural environment. A little bit of background about Leave No Trace. Ever since the early 90s, Leave No Trace has remained the leading organization that helps people protect the environment by teaching them and educating them how to enjoy it responsibly. Leave No Trace education exists in a lot of different youth program types. However, through an inventory that the center took a couple years ago in 2015, it was clear that the youth programs that we had talked to were limiting their use of Leave No Trace. For programs that were using Leave No Trace already, the range of programming and effective education was quite large. But many programs introduce Leave No Trace as the rules of the outdoors. Say for a 3-day outdoor education center that has a school coming to them, they introduce Leave No Trace in the first day and go along with the rules, and then they never circle back to it again. Some programs that do embrace the idea of Leave No Trace more holistically throughout their program still teach it in a very limiting way. In a previous life, I was a camp director and have seen this firsthand. Leave No Trace is something that's going to be talked about on that camp out that our group is going to go do next week. About it any other day of the week leading up to the program taking place in the outdoors every day. That's just not an approach, this values-driven idea of Leave No Trace, especially when we're thinking about the idea of educating youth in an outdoor setting. So it was clear to the center that there was a disconnect between how we talk about Leave No Trace here at the center and how many youth programs talk about Leave No Trace with their participants. Every youth program is taking. We have but the Accreditation was created to help enhance the efforts of all youth programs who wish to align their programming with the best practices from the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics. The second part to my answer about the why behind the need for the Leave No Trace Youth Program Accreditation really coincides with the timing of this webinar. We wanted you to have the information about the Youth Program Accreditation so that you can start planning around potentially using the resource in 2018. Many of you, I'm sure, are well into that planning phase of programming and operations, so it's a good time to make sure that, one, the program is going to fit for your bandwidth with your staff resources, but also make sure that it fits into your budget as well. There's a small financial investment in 2018. And while you don't have to start the accreditation process during the off-season, program. The reality is that using a resource like this during your operating season alone, without any planning during your off time or off season, simply turn
Hey, Andrew.
dive a little bit into the overview of the accreditation program.
Yeah,
Yes.
Andrew, I don't mean to interrupt you, but we're having issues with your sound. You're coming in and out.
Let me see if I can change that and make it a little better.
Great, thank you so much.
Is that any better?
Let's see as we keep going.
Okay. So let's dive into the overview of the accreditation program. Really, what is the youth program accreditation?
Nope, still cutting out.
Accreditation and research initiatives.
Hey, Andrew, it's still cutting out.
Still cutting out.
Yeah, after you said what is the youth program accreditation, it cut out.
Okay. Let's see. Sorry to have the technical difficulties with everybody. Severia, would it help for me to transfer to a phone call but still drive the PowerPoint?
Yeah, it might.
All right, let me try that. Let me see if I can.
Thanks for your patience, guys. We don't want to miss any of the good information that you're sharing.
Severia, I'm going to get loaded with the phone here best I can.
And thanks everyone for your patience as we sort the sound. While Andrew's figuring out the sound, it'd be great to know where people are from. I don't know if you can just type maybe in the chat box where everyone is from. Could be fun just to see where everyone's calling in. Hi, Crystal. Some familiar faces.
How's that? Can you hear me now, Severia?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Do you want to do a poll and see if other people can hear the phone audio?
Yeah, go ahead and raise your hand if you can hear on the phone. That's great, and there's no echo, so good job on switching it.
Great. Sorry about those technical difficulties, everyone.
Yeah, no worries. In the meantime, looks like we have some people hailing from Texas and Colorado, Tennessee, Minnesota, New Jersey. Love it. California, Oregon,
Great.
all across the US. DC,
Awesome.
Vermont.
Well,
Yay, awesome. All
welcome
right, so
everyone.
yeah, so we'll let you get back in there. So what is the Youth Program Accreditation?
um, again, so the Leave No Trace Youth Program Accreditation is a set of best practices and standards for the administration of Leave No Trace programming. The program's 11 standards have been developed based on Leave No Trace's education and research initiatives on effective education when teaching people this values-based system of Leave No Trace. Other elements from the world of youth development research are also incorporated into the program, so asset building, reflection, youth voice. For anybody who's used positive youth development theory or research in your program, you'll find this to be very similar to things you already use. The accreditation program is intended to be a resource for programs that take youth into the outdoors. So not every single youth program is going to find the Leave No Trace Youth Program Accreditation effective for what they do, but primarily when I talk about youth programs, I'm focusing on camps and schools, after-school programs, which include scouting-type organizations, and then just generally outdoor education organizations, maybe environmental education centers that have students visit or groups of youth visit kind of throughout the year. This is the main demographic of folks who are going to find the youth program accreditation most beneficial to their organization. Now, there are a few things that make the Leave No Trace Youth Program accreditation quite unique compared to other accreditation programs that are out there in the youth world. The first are compliance options for each standard. Youth programs come in all different shapes and sizes. We all know that. The goal of the accreditation program is not to make everyone who uses this Leave No Trace tool into exact duplicates of one another. And so we really want to embrace the culture and the uniqueness of your program. So these compliance options give your program choices when demonstrating, for example, how you train your staff in Leave No Trace, or how youth participants demonstrate their interpretive knowledge of Leave No Trace. We feel that these equally weighted choices really allow a program to retain their culture and uniqueness while at the same time fulfilling these requirements of best practices from the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics. Youth engagement is another unique aspect of this accreditation program. Other accreditation type programs that are out there could be completed by a group of administrators who sit in an office, and that's beneficial for certain things that are very black and white, risk management related. But since this is a values-driven program and really reflects on ultimately how we educate youth, the youth program accreditation is something that you can use to engage your participants' perceptions, their opinions, and their interpretations. And really those three things are essential because there are 4 of the 11 standards require that your youth participants are actively engaged with helping you fulfill the standard. And then lastly, the accreditation is full of programming tools that you can actually use. We really wanted to provide an accreditation package that includes some tangible components that would enhance your program from the ground floor up. And yes, there are philosophical elements, enhancements that come out of completing this accreditation, but these tangible program elements will begin to make a difference as soon as you start to use them. Some of the examples of these tools are the best practices rubric that allow you to evaluate where your program is currently, but also gives you a roadmap to reach the topmost tier for each assessment category. The action plan is a tool that helps you identify changes that you want to make to your program and the best path forward. And then lastly, the Federal and State Lands Workbook is a resource that not only aligns your Leave No Trace practices, which also relate to your staff training and youth education, with federal and state lands that you may operate on, but it also creates a resource that you can include in your annual permitting application package to land managers so that you can make sure that you're receiving all your necessary access and group use permits from those federal and state land agencies. We're going to dive a little deeper into the 11 standards of the youth program accreditation. The standards can really be grouped into 3 main categories to understand where they're going to impact your program the most. And the first category is in blue, the administrative elements that really impact education and programming. And that's where the first 5 standards exist. So standard 1 is organizational partnership. Standard 2 is staff training and qualifications. Standard 3, stakeholder communication. Standard 4, education resources. Standard 5, federal and state lands workbook. The next 3 standards relate to programming progression. And so those are going to be the elements that you're using when your operating season is going on, when you have participants in your program. So the program-specific principles. Standard 7, program area interpretation. Standard 8, youth creative interpretation. And then finally, the last 3 standards are focused around making changes for the future of your program, or looking forward. Short-term, long-term outcomes, thinking in that kind of category. And so that's Standard 9, the program self-assessment. Standard 10, the Leave No Trace statement. And Standard 11, the action plan. We're not going to have time to dive into every single one of these standards. We'd be here for much longer than an hour, but what we are going to do is dive into the first 5 standards a little more closely and take a look at them. So again, these are the administrative elements that are going to impact your education and programming. Standard 1, that organizational partnership, we at Leave No Trace know that the partners that we work with, especially in youth education, their bottom line, their service to their participants and ultimately to their participants' families, when delivering Leave No Trace education, is strengthened by becoming a partner of the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics. And so that's Standard 1. Standard 2, relating to staff training and qualifications. We've done research over the last few years that has shown that staff who are not trained in effective ways to deliver Leave No Trace education to youth participants, whether it's a camp setting, a school setting, the scout setting, those efforts are really in vain if there's no development and investment in your staff's time. And so standard number 2, we really want to see how are you including Leave No Trace into your program's annual staff training. What are the specific training materials that you produce for your staff? So maybe that's a staff manual excerpts that mention Leave No Trace. Maybe it's specific program areas within your organization that have Leave No Trace resources for staff members. And then finally, there's a whole host of professional Leave No Trace credentials that could be held by an individual, and that training and experience, similar to other certification type programs, is something that's going to enhance your staff's ability to teach Leave No Trace. Standard 3 kind of takes the view of Leave No Trace as your community views it. And so when we talk about stakeholder communication, we're talking about how do you communicate with parents and guardians and your alumni about the Leave No Trace messaging that your program puts forward. Maybe that's an email campaign or a blog campaign about the importance of outdoor ethics or making responsible decisions when in the outdoors. It could also be something as simple as, do you mention outdoor ethics or Leave No Trace in the program descriptions that you send out in your print catalog or your digital catalog? Standard 4, education resources. We at the center know that teaching Leave No Trace is this really big idea, and for adults it's even a big idea. So imagine youth participants who, some have spent time in the outdoors before and some have not. It's a really big conceptual idea, and we need to break it down to make it contextually relevant for youth. And using education resources like materials and games, signs, experiential education type materials are really the way to effectively push education efforts in the right direction. And so standard 4, we're just looking for what are some examples of the Leave No Trace resources that you use to enhance your initiatives and programs. One of the great things about Standard 4 is that for many programs, they create their own Leave No Trace materials. It might be, I've seen camp programs that have interpretive trails, school programs that have interpretive trails kind of throughout their property or on a certain section of their property where they can really highlight certain aspects of Leave No Trace. And they've created their own signs for that. They made it in-house. Some are just laminated sheets of paper, and some are more in the wooden sign and painted context. But either way, those types of materials can be used to demonstrate compliance for standard number 4. And then standard number 5, again, is that federal and state lands workbook. This is really that resource that is going to help those programs that take youth participants off-site, so on a day camping trip, for example, or a multi-day trip onto state or federal lands. It's going to help you understand that Leave No Trace is not the same in every area. So for example, I'm based here in Colorado, and Leave No Trace in the Arapahoe National Forest is viewed differently by land managers than Leave No Trace in the boundary waters of northern Minnesota. And so for the different areas that you go to, it's really important to recognize that Leave No Trace looks a little different because of the struggles that land managers have identified. So this workbook is going to help educate your staff, but also put you in a great position when you're applying for those permits and when you're applying for special authorization permits throughout the season or at the beginning of your season to really make sure that your programs can visit these fantastic areas. So let's take a look at, there are several resources that you'll receive when you decide that you want to begin the accreditation process. So let's take a look at just one of those resources that's reflective of the 11 standards. One of the things that you'll receive is the standards book. So it includes each of the 11 standards along with the accompanying documents that you'll need to demonstrate compliance. This includes self-evaluations, program rubrics, and other resources to help organize your program's information. What you're seeing on the screen now is an example of the standard page from the book. This is Standard 9, the program self-assessment. There are a few elements that I want to point out on this, and first is the overview. This is where you're going to find the information about the standard or the question that is asking of your program. The next section is the contextual education section, and this is something that's going to help your program kind of go more in depth with the reason behind the requirement. Why is it beneficial for your program? How is it going to serve your program or your participants or your community well in regards to Leave No Trace education? And finally, the last section is the compliance demonstration box. This area in the top right corner helps you identify what needs to be completed for each standard that you'll ultimately submit back to Leave No Trace. It's organized in a way so that you or your staff can check the boxes off and then initial and date the standard when it's complete, just so you can keep yourself organized and on track throughout the accreditation process. If you notice, the compliance demonstration box here that's being pointed to has a few mentions: complete and submit the program self-assessment form. For several standards, there are relating documents that are going to help you submit a really tight accreditation package. And those documents are included with this book, but they're also mentioned in the overview as well, indicated by the red circle in the overview box. This is the format that all 11 standards take. We wanted to make it as clear and concise as possible for programs so that they could be aware of what they had to complete and also keep themselves accountable for completing it. So we're going to dive now into the tangible impacts that the Leave No Trace Youth Program accreditation will have for your program. The first is that you'll be able to evaluate the effectiveness of your program and its Leave No Trace initiatives. Leave No Trace is a values-building education program, and there are lots of effective ways to use it But there are also ineffective ways to use it. And this evaluation process is going to help you establish where your program is as a baseline for enhancing the initiatives that you currently have at your program or new initiatives that you might bring into your program based on the accreditation results. The Leave No Trace education is Leave No Trace education is only effective in a youth program if staff who are facilitating the experience are being trained and prepared to go beyond that memorization of the 7 principles. And so you're going to receive direct feedback and suggestion about how you trained your staff and the development opportunities that you include for your staff. As I mentioned before, each youth program is unique, and that's what's part of the charm of youth programming. The cultural connection that participants, staff, and parents and guardians have to your program is really important. Our accreditation tool helps you demonstrate Leave No Trace best practices through the lens of your program's unique culture. And for us here at the center, that aspect is held in high regard, since Leave No Trace is best served through the context and relevancy that's derived from a cultural experience. In this case, the cultural experience that your participants go through when they're a part of your program. Bringing Leave No Trace into your program more holistically is something that will directly impact how your staff view the program as well. And one of the best ways to do this, as was mentioned before, is to bring your program's community into the conversation about Leave No Trace. So parents, guardians, and alumni are the obvious stakeholders in your community that should be informed about all of your Leave No Trace efforts. But this also extends to land managers who you work with to receive permits every year, or the outfitters that you contract with to provide more technical outdoor experiences. I mentioned earlier that a program can use this tool to establish a baseline for their program effectiveness when it comes to education initiatives. And that's great to know because you have a starting place. But now where do you go from that starting place? The tools in these 3 standards that are highlighted are really going to help your program identify opportunities to enhance Leave No Trace programming and education, both in terms of short-term outcomes and long-term outcomes, so that 1 to 5 year plan. These tools are also going to help you identify the bumps in the road that you might likely have in implementing new programs or new policies or new training structures or whatever it might be, whatever gaps that you want to fill. It's great to identify the opportunities, but just as important, it's also essential to plan ahead for the things that might be roadblocks and how are you going to navigate those challenges. And finally, for many youth programs out there, there's a lot of value in the accreditation process, and you're probably already pursuing or have earned other accreditation accolades from other organizations. The Leave No Trace Youth Program accreditation for a group that has earned it and has completed is going to fulfill the outdoor ethic requirements of those other accreditation programs. Other accreditation programs, just for example, would be the American Camp Association's Camp Accreditation or something like the Boy Scouts of America's National Camp Accreditation Program. Again, these are just some of the impacts that are going to be felt within your program. The Leave No Trace Youth Program accreditation is more than just checking boxes. We really feel that this resource will help bring the most effective education methods and resources into your program. So a question that I get a lot is, how long will it take for my program to be accredited? Since every program has unique resources and bandwidth throughout a programming year, this question doesn't have one answer, unfortunately. But it's very possible to achieve accreditation within a year. And so I put together a sample accreditation timeline based around a youth program whose main operating season takes place during the summer. So think something along the lines of a residential camp or a day camp type program. And I've highlighted the summer portion on the timeline is just to indicate that's the operating season when participants are in the program. The gray area reflects more of the off-season time when administrators are still working toward the progress of the program. And so right now is an excellent time to begin the accreditation process. The fall and the winter provide awesome ability to dive into the standards that focus on the administrative elements that will inform your program. Around the end of the winter is when your hiring season and your staff training preparations have likely begun if you fit this timeline. And so this is an ideal time to drop those resources into the standard compliance around Standard 2 staff training and Standard 4 education resources. As I mentioned before, there are 4 standards that require youth participant input, and that's what the 3 yellow and 1 green standard represent. These are going to be the ideal ones to focus on during your operating season because you need those youth participants to give their input. It's going to be really hard to focus on any of these standards in the off season when you don't have direct contact with your youth participants. And again, for many programs who already use Leave No Trace, this is simply going to be an opportunity to drop in those resources that you're already using to demonstrate the standard compliance. And once your programming season is complete and you come back in the fall, you can turn your focus to those final standards that really ask the question, where is your program going moving forward? So this is an ideal time for the planning stages to take place for your next year of programming. Again, this is just an example timeline for a program that focuses mainly during the summer with their youth participants. Programs like schools and after-school programs that have more than 9-month operating season are going to have a slightly different timeline. But the point of this is to demonstrate that earning accreditation is doable within a year. So again, we're really excited here at Leave No Trace about this new youth program accreditation tool. These 11 standards and best practices are really going to transform the way that your program delivers effective Leave No Trace programming and education initiatives. From the youth programs that have already decided to invest in the accreditation program, I've spoken with many of them, and they've already found that many of the tools around staff training and stakeholder communication, just to mention a few, are already making a difference to bring more people into the fold for why Leave No Trace is so important for the youth participants within their program. That's the end of the formal presentation. I wanted to leave time for question and answer, so I'll turn that back over to Severia.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, so now's a great time. If you guys have any questions, feel free to throw them in the question box, and we will start fielding those. Just to get us started, got a question for you. So, Andrew, how long is the accreditation good for once you get it? And are there annual reporting requirements that the accreditation program must fulfill, or that the accredited program must fulfill?
So it sounds like 2 questions. I'll answer in 2 parts. So the first, the first is that the accreditation process, once you become earned accreditation, it's good for 4 years. And so throughout those 4 years, there are some annual requirements that a program would need to submit to continue their accreditation. The great thing is that those annual submissions are really building on the first 11 standards. So we're not asking anything new of you. It's more just a check-in to say, hey, where are you with your action plan when you wanted to focus on enhancing your staff training in years 2 and 3? How's that going? What are the roadblocks? What have been the opportunities? Others would be, do you have any updates to the federal and state lands workbook because of any new programs that you've brought on board in the last year? So you're simply just submitting updates for the accreditation standards that you've already submitted.
Perfect, thank you. Here's a good one. Our YMCA organization has two different day camps based in one location and a residential camp based in another location. Is there a discount if we wish to pursue the accreditation in all three programs? And does each one need its own accreditation?
So let me just, so I know that I'm getting it right. There's a YMCA, there's an organization that has 2 day camps, and then they also have a residential program as well. Is that right?
Correct, yeah. So one location has 2 day camps, and then there's another location that has a residential camp.
I see. So if this particular YMCA or whatever the governing organization might be is interested in getting all 3 programs credited, the residential camp being in one location and one specific type of program would go through the accreditation process. And then the day camps would also go through the accreditation process. What we do offer for these kind of umbrella organizations that have multiple youth program sites is that there is a discount for those organizations that are looking to invest in accreditation for multiple sites. So instead of paying the $350, which is the normal baseline rate for every youth program who enters the accreditation, there would be a structured tier that would make it possible so that the investment is not 350 times 3. Instead, it's something more reasonable for those 3 programs to earn the accreditation.
Thank you. So you also sort of answered the $1 million question that's popping up right now, which is what is the cost of the program? There is, so here's a question which I think kind of covers it as well, but adds a little to it. So are there other organizational costs that the $100 annual nonprofit partnership costs, pay? So yes, there is an additional cost. We just covered that. They're already a proud LNT provider, providing LNT curriculum with urban youth participants around San Diego region here at Outdoor Outreach. When I say, and he says, when I say staff pay, I mean diverting program capacity to fulfill the 11 standards assessment. So what have you found maybe are additional organizational costs to fulfill, or time and staff costs to fulfill those standards?
Sure. So, staff costs are going to be different per organization. There's definitely time involved with this. It's going to take a staff member to kind of take responsibility for either completing the 11 standards themselves for their organization, or maybe a group of staff members spending time on this process. I spoke with a camp program this summer that invested in the accreditation right at the beginning of the summer, and then they didn't really plan ahead and prepare for that sample timeline that I kind of gave out, and so they were only able to kind of really address one of the standards throughout their programming season, because as we all know in the youth program world, once the kids get there, it is radio silence to the outside world, and everything is focused around the daily programming that you have. And so in meeting with them after the summer, it was interesting to hear their own self-reflection, and that's kind of what drove the timeline example that I put up there, that had they invested in it not right before their operating season, they would have been able to plan ahead a little bit more and been able to divert some staff time to completing this. Staff members who are ideal for completing this accreditation process, for example, are going to be director types, program managers, ideally folks who are full-time with your organization. Not to say that a seasonal programming manager could not also contribute, but if you think about all the other things that they have going on in their short window of time with you as a seasonal employee, it's going to be hard to divert their energy towards something like this unless it's really intentional in their role, something that's part of their job description to be a part of this. So there is staff time involved. It's hard to say exactly what the financials of that staff time are per program, but it's just something that once you can divert that staff time a little bit to these 11 standards, a lot of programs find that they already have the resources for the standards in different places in their organization. They need to just drag and drop them into this accreditation package to then submit to Leave No Trace. So it's not something that programs are necessarily starting off with from scratch or from the beginning. They find that they have, oh, we have 5 of the 11 standards already complete in some way, and now we can just focus on the remaining 6 that we don't have going on yet.
Thanks. I think that was super helpful. Andy and Alexander, let me know if you have any questions in addition to that, because it sort of covered your questions. Do you enroll, here's the next question for you, Andrew. Do you enroll online via the website? If so, where do you go on the website to do so?
Sure. Yeah, you can enroll at lnt.org/accreditation. Hopefully it's on the screen that I'm viewing as well as the one you're viewing. That's just our website, lnt.org, and then takes you to the accreditation page.
Great, and then I just popped that into the chat box, everyone, so you guys can grab that, and it'll also be in the follow-up emails that we'll send out tomorrow with the recording of the webinar. Let's see, question. Oh, somebody just kind of chiming in. I agree with Andrew. We had the same issue of purchasing the package just before our season started and could not complete. We're in a much better place now to take our time to complete this off-season. We are a residential summer camp. Thanks, Christopher. So just sort of giving an anecdote on how it worked best for them to sort of start now in the off-season. Thank you. That's super helpful. And Andrew, can you just go over one more time, just because I know it was sort of packaged into your other answer of a question, but what is the cost of the program and is there a renewal fee?
Sure. So the cost of the program, if you're investing in the accreditation program, is $350 as a baseline. That's for everybody. It's not based on the size of your organization or anything like that. It's just a flat rate of $350. The other cost associated with accreditation is maintaining that organizational partnership with the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics. For many folks, fulfilling Standard 1 is a $100 donation or partnership with the center. So if you think about it, it's a $450 investment up front. And there are times throughout the year where the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics brings down that $100 partnership cost, certainly at different conferences, certain times throughout our season on our website. And so what we do, what the education team does, is that we make all of our accredited partners, folks who are pursuing accreditation, we email out ahead of time all those opportunities where you can get a reduced rate on that $100 cost that goes into partnership.
Thanks for clarifying that.
And that cost, by the way, was something that, you know, when we were coming up, we started developing this program 2 years ago, and we really wanted input from the camp partners that we already worked with to say, we think this would be a great resource. We presented it to them, and then we asked those camp partners and school partners, you know, what would you invest in this financially? Like, and we got answers, you know, kind of all over the board, but the main chunk, if you take away the outliers, the main group of answers responded between $300 and $550 is what they would view this as a investment value for their organization. So that's really what we centered that $350 amount around.
Great, thank you. We want to dive a little deeper into the staff investment time. So the first question was, what time investment have you experienced during staff training to train seasonal staff who will actually implement the program? And so sort of building on that, the youth involvement standards during the summer requires the involvement of seasonal staff, or am I wrong? Question mark. I realize that I can do most of these standards during the year, but I do not interact with campers enough to implement this program myself. So basically, what is the investment in, you know, training somebody's staff to now implement the standards?
Sure. So I'll start with, it sounds like the question is revolving around staff training, and then seasonal staff throughout the summer. So I'll kind of address it there. With staff training, there are a whole host of ways that you could train your seasonal staff to prepare them to teach Leave No Trace in your program. That doesn't mean that every single one of your staff member needs to take Leave No Trace's 5-day Master Educator course. It could be something as little as spending, I know camp programs and school programs that spend their professional development time and spend up to an hour with their staff, focusing on that one resource that they're going to use throughout the summer. Something like Bigfoot's Playbook or 101 Ways to Teach Leave No Trace, the games and activities and initiatives that really engage you. They're going to spend an hour focusing on teaching their staff how to use the resource. Here's what it is. Here are the games and initiatives that are included, and you're going to be able to practice them for about 20 minutes. And now we're going to move on to something else that we have happening. We at the center, and I, again, as a former camp director, there are several training things that your seasonal staff should go through as it relates to risk management and interacting with campers that should always supersede Leave No Trace education. So the struggle is, where do you plug it in? Is an hour too much for some programs? Yes, an hour is too much for some programs. But Leave No Trace has a whole host of resources for folks who are training seasonal staff that if the hour format doesn't work, well, here's a 10-minute a day type format that would work for you. Here's a training resource that you can send out to your staff at, once they become hired on, where they can take an online training course and then arrive to staff training with a baseline knowledge for Leave No Trace. You only need to fill in the gaps a little bit about your culture, your camp culture, your program culture. So hopefully that kind of gave you a little more insight about the time during training. When it comes to seasonal staff and those 4 requirements that take place with seasonal staff, but also with youth participants, many of them don't require those seasonal staff to be trained in Leave No Trace to be able to work through those 4 standards. So, for example, the standards, the program. Sorry, I'm getting goofed up. The youth creative interpretation, for example, is a standard that we want to see how do your youth demonstrate their interpretive knowledge of Leave No Trace. And so that could be something like art projects, creative performances, like a skit night type thing. It could also be something like a CIT, a counselor and training program, if you have one of those, where your CITs are getting the opportunity to teach their peers about Leave No Trace. All relates back to interpretation, and really the only thing that a seasonal staff member would have to do would have to be able to document those things, and we outline all the documentation process in those standard documents that would come along with those particular standards. Does that answer the question about seasonal staff a little bit more?
We shall see.
For those who have more questions about seasonal staff, if we're still not, hitting the hammer on the nail for what your question is, I'm happy to follow up more beyond this webinar. We can certainly keep talking about it now, but if you feel like you have questions that aren't being answered, I'm happy to follow up with you after the webinar.
Yep, and he said that was very helpful. That's great. Thank you. Okay, so another question. Do accredited programs have any sort of priority when it comes to scheduling the L&T traveling trainers for a program visit? Being pretty far from Boulder, this would be a valuable formal engagement from the center to remind our participants, staff, and potentially board and donors how valuable our partnership is, and share a little bit about L&T's in-house programs as well. Good question.
Yes, that is a great question. That's a big question. I might need some reminders about the last 2 elements of it. I'll start with the traveling trainer program. For those who aren't familiar, Leave No Trace, we're a small organization. We only have 13 full-time staff based in Colorado, but we have 8 staff members who travel in pairs all across the country and provide programming opportunities or training opportunities for youth programs, for agencies, for, we visit different festivals where we can really engage people when they're in the outdoors. And so accredited youth programs are going to have a kind of a special channel to get to those traveling trainers. Being an accredited youth program doesn't necessarily guarantee that the trainer schedule is going to work out in your area, but the prioritization, because you are an accredited youth program, because you are taking these steps to enhance what you're doing, we want to acknowledge that. And so we do take that into consideration for programs that are applying for a traveling trainer visit. Severia, could you read back the second part of that question?
Yeah, I think the second part of it was just more saying that it would really be a huge benefit and a value if that were to be the case. That being
okay.
an accredited program and being able to schedule the Leave No Trace Traveling Trainers program would add great value.
Yes, okay.
Great. Are there any other questions as we're sort of narrowing down on our end time? Well, as we wait to see if any last-minute questions come up, Andrew, I'd like to thank you for sharing this new program with us. I'm super excited, and it seems like it's a really great way to sort of take Leave No Trace to the next level for these programs and really have a deeper relationship with you guys. So it seems like a great opportunity.
Yeah, and thank you all for joining today, and to TYO for the opportunity to talk about the youth program accreditation. We're really excited. We feel like it's something that's going to really help serve those programs that are interested in bringing Leave No Trace and enhancing it more within their programming community. And so please, if you have more questions beyond this, my contact info is on the slide that you have now, and I know it'll be sent out in the follow-up email as well. But feel free to get in touch. I'm always available to chat through any logistics or any questions that you may have.
One more question. Here's a good one. Why is this program important? That's a good one to sort of end it on, Andrew.
Why is this program important? Well, circling back to some of the needs that we talked about earlier in the presentation, that youth programs are a great opportunity to engage young people about Leave No Trace and what it means to have an outdoor ethic and take responsibility in the outdoors, because Leave No Trace is education for the environment. And so this accreditation program is important because there's a whole range of how people are using Leave No Trace, but it's not necessarily an impactful way. It's not an effective way to teach Leave No Trace. And so we here at the center, because of the research and the education and expertise that we have, we wanted to bring that and disseminate it down to programming professionals who are working with seasonal staff, who are working with young people who maybe are familiar with Leave No Trace, but maybe not. We really want to disseminate those best practices and those standards down so that every youth program has the opportunity to be really delivering high impact, high yield programming to their youth participants.
Thank you. Yes, it definitely seems like it's a great way for programs to elevate their Leave No Trace engagement, and in a very deliberate and intentional way. So,
yes,
which is great.
Yes, very much so. The last thing I'll say is that for some accreditation programs, the culture of the accreditation itself is such that, having the logo on your website, whatever it might be, is the motivation for going through an accreditation process. For some programs, they may find that to be the case, but really our accreditation program is going to have the biggest impact for those programs that really value intentionality and going through their program and wanting to better themselves. And being a youth educator myself and my academic background, I know that there are many programs out there that have that intentionality behind them. So we really feel like this program serves those folks who are really trying to make a change within their program holistically.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you again for joining us. For everyone on the call, You will have a recording of this after the webinar, and it will also be on YouTube and TYO. And once again, thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope that you have a great week.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.